Okay, I'll show you how to go ahead and disassemble these pruners and bypass pruners and get them cleaned up and sharpened up. So the first thing we do is take off the nut here on the little locking wing. Keep everything right close by so you have it there. And then unlock it. Take off the spring. It's easy, it just slides in and out very easily. Sets on those two pegs, slide it back, take it off. And then this should just be finger tight because that's how we tighten it up when we put it on. Go ahead and take off that locking nut on the assembly. Set her down. Then this little ear also comes right off. Sometimes it's just easy to lift the two of them apart at that point. And this bolt will drop out the back. And then that's when your blade comes off. Sometimes that blade has gotten stuck on there pretty good and you might have to tap it a little bit. But go ahead and take that blade off. Clean it up. Like I said, I use a carburetor cleaner actually to take that pine resin and such off. And if it doesn't all come right off, I just take my wire brush and can clean off the last of that resin that's on there, pine sap and such, and wipe it down and it cleans right up really nice and handy. If necessary, you can go ahead and put a little edge on it. I have my sander right here. It doesn't take much. Just a whetstone will work just fine too. I use my sander because I put a fine sand belt on it and use that just because I do so many of these here at one time. I'm doing 18 sets of nippers here at one time, so that's what I use for that there. Just speeds up the process a little bit. You can go ahead and set that back onto your bottom assembly. It locks down. Make sure that you have that same direction as it was before. Little trick, sometimes what you want to do if you're not quite sure, before you take it apart, take a picture of it with your phone. That way you've got it so when you're going to assemble it back together, it's not complicated, but it's always nice to have those other little references like that. So then I go ahead and I take off the bypass side of it, because sometimes that's got a fair amount of resin on it too. You'll see, especially on this side, this is the side that the blade comes down against, and it gets built up with resin along this edge here. Whether it's woody material, sap, that kind of stuff, or if you're doing a lot of wet material. And same thing, go ahead and spray it, clean it off. And if you do this on a regular basis, it doesn't build much up on there at all. So go ahead and set it back in place. Then I always put my bolt back in the back side here just to hold it in place as I'm assembling them back together. Now, just so you can see, I don't know if you can tell there, one bolt is longer than the other. You use the shorter bolt here in the back hole, and the longer one goes in the front because that's holding that little locking assembly on there. So we'll go ahead and get that in, and I just kind of finger tight it down here for right now as I put it together. Then you can go ahead and set the plate back on, making sure that you have the locking notch on the right side. It's generally away from your nippers all the time. And then you need the little locking ear back on there. Put that bolt in, and again, I just so you get it down there enough to get it in place, hold it in place. I don't tighten it down because you got to put that over top of the locking nut, which will go in there just about next. Now go ahead and take the bolt, and you'll see it's square on one end. Slide it through the back side so that round part goes through there. Then the square part holds in place on this side here. That gives you that swivel action. So once you have that in place, then you can go ahead and put your locking nut back onto it. And when you put that down, you only want to do it finger tight, and you kind of play with it. You want it tight as it bypasses that, but you don't want it so tight that it won't spring back open with the spring on there. So you can just kind of feel it, if it's about right, which is where I have it now. I kind of like it right there. Swing that little locking ear back over that holds that nut from turning it all for you and never loosening up. And you can go ahead and tighten that down. Tighten down your other bolt. There. Then we'll go ahead, put the spring back into it. Works very well. So you got a nice tight bypass on here now. Makes a sharp edge. That's nice and clean. On the blade side, on both sides of the blade, takes all that stickiness out of it. Before, when I'd close it, it would just stay shut because that pine sap was holding it in place there. Go ahead and put your locking ear back on there, and it is all done. Sometimes what I'll do, I like to use lithium grease on here. Generally, if they're kept clean and tight all the time, you shouldn't have to. But once in a while, what I'll do when I do have it apart, I'll use some lithium grease and put between there before I set them back down in place, just to help them slide a little more. But generally, if they're not rusty and you keep them clean, that's not necessary at all. So there you go. I got these all done. Keep these stored someplace where they don't have a lot of moisture on them when they get dirty and wet and muddy, which they're going to do when you use them on a regular basis. Make sure you clean them up when you're all done, and they should last you. A pair of pruners like this here should last you a lifetime as a homeowner. I mean, even with all the work we do, commercial work and whatnot, and the amount of time that I use on them, I have some of my original Felco number 2s, which are, let's see, I've got some Felco right here. They're a super nice pruner. I've had some of these for years, and about the only thing that wears out is that blade after you sharpen it a few times. Get replacement blades for it. Not that big a deal, and it's fairly cheap, and that's all you need to do. But something like this here, I probably had this set of pruners right here. I can tell which one it is because it's wore off the most. Might be this one here too. I got 2 of them like that. It's probably 15 years old, 16 years old, and from spring until all the winter planters are done, I'm using it almost every single day. It's always on my hip, so they'll last you a long time. So there you go. That's how you sharpen up, grease up your pruners, and have them ready to go for next spring.